this and welcome everybody to Contemporary Issues class today. We are going to talk about, yes, Ron is sharing his screen. We're going to talk about guns today. Unfortunately, it's a continuing issue and we are going to look at it from some different perspectives today, including new laws. And a lot of you probably saw the news last night or this morning also that the latest shooting in Indianapolis was done by a 19-year-old, again with assault weapons, and that he had been identified by the police as a danger and taken away a shotgun a few months ago, but he did not get followed up on and prohibited from buying more guns. And so it's another sad case. And we will have time to discuss all that. Our usual announcements first. We ask you to mute in the lower left corner of your screen. If you're not talking, please mute so we don't have the background noise. And we are recording this for future playback for those who miss our live discussion today. And please be kind to our speaker and don't dominate too much with too many repeated comments. Let other folks have a chance to come into the discussion too. One other good discussion or announcement that we have today is our speaker Ron has invited and arranged for U.S. Representative Jason Crow, our congressman from Aurora and Centennial, to be our special guest 2 weeks from today. And so that's going to be a really good discussion, well attended. And Jason Crow is also vice chair of one of the big gun control, gun discussion committees in the U.S. Congress. So he will talk to us about this issue too. So thank you, Ron, for arranging that. Any other announcements anybody have? At our church, there's a youth auction today in the parking lot. Nice that people will be gathering in the parking lot, sitting on chairs outside and participating in that. So our church is opening up for more things and starting with the services again on May 23. We will be doing online reservations as we begin to open up and add more people. So that's the plan as far as I've heard. And then small groups also in the church by reservation also starting. So we are opening up the church and starting back. Any other thoughts or announcements before we turn it over to Ron?
One quick thing on
Sure, Terry.
this morning's talk show, Dr. Fossey was asked if gun issues should be a mental health issue, and he said he did not see why it would not become a mental health issue.
It's a big part of it for sure. Okay, yeah, Bob and Karen, see your.
So I was thinking with Jason Crow joining us in 2 weeks, maybe if we think of questions that we might want to ask and submit those to Ron, so that it would just make our time with him go more quickly. He could answer some of the questions. Anyway, just a thought or an idea.
Yeah, that also gives the speaker more time to prepare an answer, especially for some of the more complex issues.
Great.
Yes. And that will be a fast hour, and we're going to advertise it to the whole congregation. Rev Mark is going to join us also that day, our senior pastor. So glad to have that opportunity. Okay, Ron.
Once again, ask people to mute.
Yes, if you're not speaking, please mute in lower left corner, and I can do that from my host functions too. Okay, Ron, thank you for preparing this.
Okay, well, unless you've been living in a gopher hole, these last couple weeks have been pretty tumultuous in the United States, and the number and frequency of mass homicides has definitely gone up. We're on pace to set the record for the worst year of mass murders if this continues, And yes, it's getting worse. It's not healing itself. Okay, I'm going to come down on some irresponsible gun owners pretty hard today. May say a few things that you don't like to hear, but let's face the facts and go right at it. Okay, American exceptionalism. About 42% of US households own at least one gun. And it's a fair statement that firearms command a higher degree of cultural significance in the United States than any country in the world. We just seem to be enamored with them. And there's a lot of studies asking the question why. Part of it is America's heritage of having used guns to keep slaves under control, to wrest the control of the country away from the Native American Indians, the Wild West, taming of the Wild West, all those sorts of things. World War II has been shown to be a major factor. An awful lot of American personnel went overseas, had automatic weapons, cannons, tanks, and all kinds of powerful weapons put in their hands. And same thing with Korea, Vietnam. And so a lot of American men brought back a, shall we call it a comfort or even a liking towards firearms, particularly potent firearms that were more than needed to just hunt rabbits. A survey showed that about 46% of the worldwide total of civil held firearms is here in the United States. And we'll look at a chart. There it is. This is just a few countries that I picked off a chart in alphabetical order. But that last column is civilian firearms per 100 people. If every American citizen had one firearm, that number would be 100. It's higher than 100. It's 120. That means there's 1.2 guns out there for every American man, woman, child, retiree, whatever. And we can see that that number significantly surpasses any other country, even those South American countries. Okay, gun death data. The curve is going up. That blue curve is the suicide rate, and the bottom curve is the assault rate. There's statistics coming in now for the results influenced by the pandemic, and it looks like the pandemic has made certainly mass homicides and suicides worse. Probably no surprise to that. As a general ratio, you find with firearm deaths, it's a little over 60% suicide and about 35% homicide. So suicide does dominate, but that's no small number. Using the 2017 data, there were almost 40,000 gun deaths if you combine the suicide and the homicide rate. And it's now pushed over 40,000. So it's surpassed auto accidents, which used to run about 44,000.
A lot of people on there. So
And
maybe
it
their
dropped down.
system is overloaded.
Okay, so, and then on top of that, not only do we have the actual death numbers, but we've got an horrendous number of people who are walking wounded out there, people who have been paralyzed. There's at least a couple survivors of Columbine that are in wheelchairs and will never walk again, at least one and maybe more. There are others who are carrying severe injuries that will carry through the rest of their lives and severely inhibit their ability to live a normal life. So the toll of firearms is horrendous, particularly if they add those injuries onto it. There are some of the raw numbers, a 6-year review of numbers. You can see the homicide rate over 15,000, suicide rate over 35,000. The injury rate is actually much higher than that, but we see also there's a lot of children, teens, and of course the mass shooting number is going up pretty quickly. Okay, if you remember, was it MCI that had the friends and family plan? Well, that plays true with guns. If we look at the numbers, firearm homicides by the numbers, over 60% of the homicides are committed by a family member or other acquaintance. So the victims often know or knew, since they're dead, their perpetrator. And you can see friends and family are not a safe group relative to endangering you, particularly if they have mental health issues and they have a lot of guns. So there's over 60% of these homicides committed by a family member or acquaintance. An intimate partner, 14%. So yeah, intimate partners can be dangerous. Never take a gun to the bedroom, huh? Only about 25% are committed by strangers. And the mass shooting numbers, it's higher than what's shown on this chart. It's gone up from 0.1% to 0.2%, but it's still a fairly known numbers. The biggest danger to you, percentage-wise, still remains friends, family, and intimate partners. I call it love American style. All right, how about assault weapons? We had a ban on assault weapons in that window between 1995 and 2005. That spike in that window that I've got blocked off in red bars was Columbine. But we can see that the number of firearm deaths by mass shootings stayed pretty low. Then in 2005, the law on banning of assault weapons was lifted, and the curve has been screaming upward ever since that. Here's some data on the bottom left corner of this slide. 1 in 5 law enforcement officers slain in the line of duty between 2016 and 2018 were killed by an assault weapon. Over that 3-year period, 164 officers were slain in the line of duty. So assault weapons are dangerous to the general public, and they're also a tremendous danger to law enforcement. No surprise there. Okay, some people won't like this cartoon, but making the connection between insanity and gun. And there's the cartoon guy saying, it's only one tiny step from banning assault rifles to Hitler, Stalin, and some consider it an assault on their American freedom. Okay, looking at our country compared to others. The blue bar is suicide rate. The red bar is homicide rate. And as you can see, in every country, suicide pretty much exceeds, suicide exceeds homicide. And
Actually, we put it under the sink. That's where we use it mostly. Oh, okay. Well, then just put it in here. It'll fit.
yeah,
That's
deaths per 100,000. We can see the USA. This is 2010 data, so it's a bit old, but this trend hasn't changed much. The US wins the prize you don't want to win, for its suicide rate and its homicide rate. It's way higher than other countries. And again, this is 10-year-old data, so I need to get it refreshed. But the fact remains, if you fill a big football stadium, if you filled Mile High Stadium and also pack the concourse, you might be able to get 100,000 in there. And it says you're going to have more than 6 people killed by suicide and more than 3 killed by homicide if you pack out Mile High Stadium per year. Okay. Third world countries. Despite our homicide rate of 3.1 per 100,000, yes, there are some, quote, third world, particularly banana republics, that run the homicide rate even incredibly higher. You can see the horrific number for El Salvador, Venezuela, Honduras, Jamaica, and if you ask the question, what's causing some of the border problems in Mexico, all the people fleeing, this chart certainly answers part of it. Okay, so there's two viewpoints. I remember chatting with the last representative for House District 38, who's been replaced by David Ortiz. But the former holder of that office said, quote, "The gun deaths are a price we pay for our Second Amendment freedom." So it kind of comes down to a me versus you balance. But I say, if the exercise of your freedom causes tens of thousands of deaths and injury each year, maybe it's time to bridle your freedom a bit. And I'm going to take a swipe at the human race today. I wouldn't take a second grade class, give them all steak knives and a quick lesson on safe knife handling, and send them out to the playground. I think I got some bright grandkids and they probably would handle them okay. But I think most of us would agree that the second graders, just as a whole, can't responsibly handle steak knives on the playground. And in some respects, our miserable human race is showing that as a whole, we have enough rotten apples, bad eggs, people with mental problems in the population that if we freely disperse mass numbers of firearms into that populace without controls, we're going to get bad numbers of mass shootings, suicides, and homicides. So it's kind of a human race kind of thing. You can say the same if you look at some statistics on other things in life. A motorcycle rider is like 18 times more likely to be killed per passenger mile than a car driver. We can show airline accidents correlate with the number of landings and takeoffs. As you triple the number of landings and takeoffs from small airports, you're going to see roughly a tripling of aircraft accidents. So putting more guns out there inevitably leads to more deaths. There's no getting around it. Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book, The Meaning of Life, considered one of the most popular books of the last century, he said, "I recommend that the Statue of Liberty be supplemented by a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast." And I agree with Viktor Frankl on this one. All right, let's look at the states. You say, we all know from past studies, America is not homogeneous. When I mean homogeneous, I mean by race, by education, by industrial and occupation. And it certainly isn't homogeneous in terms of gun ownership. Here's a plot that shows on the x-axis the gun ownership. In other words, the percentage of households that own a gun. And we can see there's a dramatic variation as you move from left to right. The big gun owners, Colorado, by the way, is pretty much right in the middle, right here. It's I think still a little below the national average, but it's pretty much in the middle. And then the y-axis is the gun deaths per 100,000 people per year. And we can see that a high number per capita, we see Wyoming, Louisiana, Alabama have some of the worst per capita homicide gun deaths rates. It's both homicide and suicide, by the way. And these numbers vary a little bit. I think this is 2017 data. And some states move up a little bit, move down a little bit, but the front runners tend to stay up ahead of the pack. And you don't want to be up here. That means you're literally shooting yourself via homicide or suicide. And we can also see not only a rural urban state kind of divide, but we can see a political divide where people's opinions of guns and ownership of guns does correlate very strongly with their political affiliation. Look at the states down here with the low percentages of gun ownership. And all these states in this cluster here went for Joe Biden. Now let's go up to this part of the curve where we have high percentages of households owning guns, and in turn, high per capita death rates. And again, look at that correlation. You just got to look at it and say, yeah, more guns, move to the right, get more guns into more households, and you're going to drive up the per capita gun rate. Undeniable data, undeniable data. But as you look in the upper right-hand corner, notice how all those states voted in the presidential election. All of these went for Trump, all these went for Biden. Again, there's a political, ideological divide on the issue of guns. Okay, that shows the gun deaths on a graph, and that shows all the states. And wow, notice how much safer you are in general if you just plop down in a general location of one of these states.
Let's all go to Hawaii.
Versus the ones on the left. And shown in red, the redder the state on this graph here, the worse it is. And again, the safest state is Hawaii and Massachusetts, New York. Most people say, New York. You think of New York City, you think of it as being infested with crime. But overall, the state homicide rate is way lower per capita than a lot of other places. And yes, this state, New York, does have some of the strictest gun laws. Okay, states that are going the wrong way in terms of gun restrictions. Missouri has gotten a lot more Wild West, as I call it. They've tossed and canned a tremendous number of their gun laws, and they've seen their suicide and their homicide rate go up dramatically. So with liberty comes death. Give me liberty or give you death is what I say. If you embrace too much liberty, it throws too many guns out there. The state of Connecticut, which absorbed the awful Sandy Hook massacre, has got some of the stricter gun laws. They have you've got to get a permit to purchase. I might also add in that regard, there are some countries where you have to go get a permit, just like you have to get a driver's license. And some nations require you to submit background references with your application for a gun. Now, that doesn't happen in the United States, but there are some countries that wisely, I think, do. If you went to get a gun, could you get 5 people to sign off for you? Well, I hope most of the people listening this morning could say yes, but hopefully that guy in Indianapolis couldn't get 5 good references for himself if there was such a law. Connecticut has a red flag law. So does Colorado. So does Indiana, although it's a weak red flag law. And after Sandy Hook, Connecticut added bans on assault rifles, high capacity ammo magazines, added background checks for all gun sales, and more restrictions. So I say hats off to Connecticut. You can see where my prejudices lie. After Connecticut tightened its gun restrictions in the mid-90s, by the way, there was no increase in white male suicide. And incidentally, white males commit suicide more than anybody else, way more than blacks. Our black brethren are smart enough not to shoot themselves. We're not. And of course, you ladies out there in general are much, much less likely to commit suicide. So it says testosterone dudes that really go wild. Okay, we're going to move into some of the laws that impact. If you want to improve gun safety, you want to get a permit to purchase, you want red flags laws, you want mandated background checks, you want longer waiting time to purchase, you want to close gun show loopholes and loopholes for private sales, and you want to put limits on bump stocks, assault weapons, and these sort of things. If you want to make your gun safety worse, you want to make open carry easy, permitless carry, campus carry, no waiting periods, and you want rules that say a man's home is his castle and you can blast away at anything that comes on your property. Okay. So what is going on at the federal level? There are 2 bills that have passed the House of Representatives just in this last month. H.R. 8 would expand background checks on individuals seeking to purchase or transfer firearms. So that's one of them. The second one that did pass the House is the Enhanced Background Check Act of 2021. It would close what they call the Charleston loophole, and that's a gap in the federal law that lets gun sales proceed without a completed background check if 3 business days have passed. You've probably heard that sometimes people go in, apply for a gun, and like some people just have complex records of having moved a lot, changed occupations, maybe changed their name through marriage, and the authorities that are checking it out can't get the investigation completed really quickly. Of course, some of the right-wing legislators say, if you can't complete the check in 3 days, you got to give them their gun. I mean, we wouldn't want somebody to be have to wait 4 days. I mean, to get their assault weapon. I mean, that would be incredible deprivation of liberty. So these 2 laws have passed the House. That's the good news. The bad news, I looked at the Week magazine just yesterday and the Washington Post this morning, and the chances of it passing the Senate, either of these passing in the Senate, are not too good. I don't think we should give up on them yet, but it doesn't look very favorable. And I love this one from Gene Wilder. Is that the name of this actor? So gun laws won't work because criminals don't follow laws. Tell me why then do we have laws at all? And I'm also going to take a swipe at the GOP here. Sorry, gang. But the rules that have just gone through the Colorado House of Representatives and the Colorado Senate, I don't think there was a single GOP vote to support either of those bills. We're going to jump to the Colorado actions. This has happened in Colorado just in the last couple months, Senate Bill 21078, lost or stolen firearms. All it says that if you've got a gun and it gets stolen, you need to report it within a week or 2. And unfortunately, stolen guns and guns that are left in car seats, trunks of cars, lying on kitchen tables for easy burglary, discovery, and access, put almost 250,000 guns into the hands of people that shouldn't have them every year. So that's one law that Colorado did pass just in the past few weeks. Also, the House Bill 21-1106, safe storage. The Senate approved the safe storage bill, and it looks like it's a sure bet to get signed. It basically says you got to keep your guns safely kept away. This little picture says 8 kids a day are unintentionally killed or injured by family fire. And we don't mean family bonfires out on the barbecue. Guns, in fact, are the 3rd leading cause of death for children in America. It's just behind illnesses and drownings and car crashes. 16 children a day are hospitalized due to firearm injuries. And of the 23 high-income countries in the world, 91% of the children killed by firearms in 2010 were in the United States. Make America great again, huh? All right, and then here's one that I really think is a good idea. House Bill 21, the Domestic Violence Relinquishment. This says if someone gets convicted of domestic violence, they have to give up their firearms. And the data says a domestic violence victim whose abuser has a firearm is 5 times more likely to die than one who isn't married or living with an abuser that has a firearm. So ladies, pick boyfriends and husbands who don't have loaded guns under the bed. Okay. So I think this is a good law that Colorado has put up. Jumping to the federal level, Biden and Harris have put out 5 basic executive orders. We're going to look at them real quickly here. One is a rule. They're going to get the Department of Justice to issue a proposed rule to stop the proliferation of ghost guns. Ghost guns are where you buy parts and pieces in a kit and you put it together. So it's kind of like a homemade hobby kit assault gun, and it doesn't have a serial number. It's not registered or anything like that. So we want to try to put a stop or slow down this bad tendency. This next one, this was one used by the Boulder shooter. You can take a pistol, if you want to call that thing we see there with the magazine on it a pistol, and you can put this extender arm on it, and you can say, well, this isn't an assault rifle, this is just a pistol still. And so they're going to try to put rules saying that if you put a stabilizing brace on or an extender on the quote pistol, and that's a hell of a pistol, you're going to have to call it an assault rifle and not dodge the rule. ERPO, Extended Risk Protection Order laws. The states in red here are the states that have ERPO laws in effect. I'm proud to say Colorado is one of them.
And all these states have had.
All those other states do not have ERPO laws. Okay, another thing that Biden and Harris are doing is they're going to try to put at least $5 billion over a period of 8 years into community-based programs, evidence-based community intervention strategy, and violence intervention programs. And they are going to try to target this toward the communities that are seeing the worst of the gun violence. Black men make up 6% of the population, but over half the gun homicide victims. And Black women, Latinos, and Native Americans also get killed at a disparate rate. There's some of the racial and sex-based insights into gun violence. Again, over 50% of gun homicide victims are Black. The suicide is controlled, though, by the white men. And yeah, there's 93% of the gun suicide victims are white. White men are 3 times more likely, and about 10% of the gun victims are under age 18. American school children are killed by bullets 10 times more than our industrial counterpart nations. Okay, another thing they're going to do is have an annual report on firearms trafficking. There have been laws put into the U.S. Law books in the last 20 years that have banned the Center for Disease Control, for example, from spending any money looking at gun control. And they've also gone and tried to prevent the medical associations and whatever from doing more investigation and data collecting on guns. Here's a cartoon that I like. It's a horrible cartoon in a way, but it's a It's an accurate cartoon that represents American culture. The Bloodbath and Beyond Gun Shop shows Homer Simpson going in, and the data does show that a very small proportion of gun dealers sell the majority of guns traced to crime. And this fourth bullet just above it says, researchers estimate that nationwide, approximately 2,000 firearms dealers and pawnbrokers knowingly sell firearms illegally. They do things like failing to keep records, transferring to prohibited persons, making false entries in their record books, and conducting illegal out-of-state transfers. Okay, well, I've been on my soapbox for quite a while now, so let's turn it over to all of you and see what you think and what your thoughts and comments are. I'll take it off of share screen. Whoops.
It's okay. Ron, my thought is, you know, we have so many, it seems like every week another mass shooting, but we actually are trying to do a lot of things to do sensible gun control. And we'll probably never know how many shootings are avoided because of that. So it just shows what a problem we have. It's just amazing. The red flag laws, I think that's an important thing that they need to really focus on. In Indiana, they have a red flag law, but it would have helped if the police had stopped that guy under the red flag law that was there.
And even the Boulder shooter, the parents knew the kid had a problem, and they were very nervous when he shows up with his new hobby sport gun, but they didn't say anything to any authorities. That family loyalty overstepped protecting the public.
The problem, Steve, with the red flag laws is that the sheriff in Weld County will not enforce it. And Weld County has Greeley as its major municipality. So you've got to get the compliance for the sheriff.
A lot of sheriffs are very pro-gun and don't want to enforce some of these laws. Jim, go ahead.
Did you see in Douglas County 2 weeks ago, see something, say something? I think it was a 19 or 20-year-old kid on I-25 in one of those deals. They called him in that he was carrying a rifle. The police showed up. He had it in the case. He pulled it out of the case and went and started to shoot at him, and they shot him. Just think if he was going to try and shoot a bunch of people going up and down I-25.
Yep. Jim, go ahead.
My suspicion is that, I think that Ron is preaching to the choir here. Now, I might be wrong about that, or maybe a few people that are on the opposite end of this discussion, but I think generally speaking, I could say that. And my question to Ron and to everybody here is, I think that the country is at a crisis point. And I cannot understand why the United Methodist Church, why St. Andrew, why the Christian community itself is not standing up and raising its voice in this issue. We are in the probably the worst circumstances, but everything else seems like it's getting more press than this, except when somebody does something horrific, and then it dies, and the churches are silent. The churches as entities are silent on this issue.
You know, Ron, I have my thoughts on it. My thoughts on this, Ron, are, you know, it's interesting. I'm against mass violence, you know, obviously mass violence caused by assault rifles. But looking at your graphs, it's really depicting from the CDC side, it's suicides. Okay, more deaths are caused by suicides than all these assault rifles. I mean, we shouldn't have them, but but it's more difficult to use our phone than it is a gun. You know, why can't they put smart controls is what I wonder. Smart controls on the gun to make it so effing difficult, excuse my language, I didn't say the word, but to turn that thing on, to make it fire. You know what I mean? Try to send something from your phone sometime with two-factor security. Oh my
Right.
God. You
They
know,
already have that stuff for guns called fingerprint identity.
do they really?
It's out there available. We do have it. The problem is guns is big business, and the business world runs what happens in this country. There's millions and billions of dollars made in selling ammunition. There's so much ammunition being sold, you almost can't go anywhere to buy something for your gun.
Yeah, that good point. Could I make just three little points?
Sure, go ahead, Natalie.
Okay, thanks. Kids always know where the guns are in their house. They always, and when you're not there or whatever, they'll get them, and that's very bad. The other thing is why, besides the money issue, of course, and all of that that fuels this industry, it's anger, revenge. We haven't really gone back to the reasons why. And the other thing is the movies. Think of Clint Eastwood. Hollywood perpetuates the whole thing. So you have this kind of mentality, make my day and all this. So there's so many issues here, but I think your point, somebody's point, that we have to start the propaganda for, against all of this, if we can. It's just so huge. And but I just remember that kids always know where your guns are. Anyway, thank you for your, all of your comments are really interesting. I just wish I could do something except talk. So I guess watch the bills in Congress and support the ones that support our thoughts anyway, I guess, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Natalie. It's such
Last
a
week,
complex problem. So
couple
many.
weeks ago,
Go ahead, Terry.
a couple of weeks ago, Littleton finally passed a law that said gun shops can no longer leave their guns on display overnight. They now have to case them and lock them up because people were driving a stolen car into them and taking the guns off. It's all about making guns locked up.
Okay.
And
Lois,
has had her hand up for a while.
Lois, go ahead and unmute yourself in your lower left corner of your screen.
There it goes. Isn't it interesting that the biggest amount of children killed is at Sandy Hook, 21 children. And my good friend used to teach there. He lives here now. But that boy that did all that shooting was a young boy. He got his gun out of his parents' supposedly locked closet. But Mom forgot to lock it that day, or somehow it wasn't locked. So he got the gun and did all of that. Okay, so it wouldn't do any good to have that gun with a lock on it or anything. I mean, it amounts to some, for children, it amounts to some parents being a little better with putting their guns under safe place control. A lot of the children shot.
The perpetrator at Sandy Hook had Asperger's syndrome, which is a mild form of autism. But
right.
His parents were divorced. His mom, though, actually took him out, I think, to shooting ranges and sort of semi-encouraged that hobby. So
right.
I know, but you got to think about all the parents with children. They're all trying to, in that case, the mother is trying to get her son raised, in a normal world, so that she thought it shouldn't matter that she has those guns, but boy, it sure did. And that young guy really knew how to use the gun. He managed to shoot 21 young people plus a few teachers. That's pretty big for a guy that was a teenager. 13, 14. I don't know. That I have to stop and think a little bit with all these laws about guns and that.
Good point, Lois. Let's let some other folks talk that haven't yet. Ann Warmley, go ahead, please.
In 1980, I was teaching children that had some pretty significant learning disabilities. And I had a little boy named Ronnie, who was 7 years old, but only functioning around 2.5. His father was a police officer outside of school. He was with his dad in a car. His dad left him alone in the car, and he had a gun box that was unlocked. Ronnie opened the gun box and shot himself in the head. He was in a coma in Children's Hospital for 3 months. He was in my classroom. I never thought I would see Ronnie again. Went to visit him in the hospital, but then after Christmas break, he appeared, and he was blind. He was only functioning at the 1 year level. And you may not think from 1 year to 2.5 is that big of a difference, but think developmentally of your own grandchildren, okay? And then he moved to another school, and I almost thank goodness he did, because he would have been in my class the next year. Because of the incident, his amount of seizures significantly increased. He died of a seizure right at school. And then another thing is, when they were talking about having teachers carry guns recently, I said, I am so glad I have retired. I retired after 37 years in 2012. And I thought, how do they expect us to have direct access to a gun if there is an active shooter? Most of these shooting incidences, as I recall, have happened very quickly. Within a few minutes, the children are and adults are killed, and the person has either left the scene or killed himself. Think of what happened at Arapahoe High School. It happened very fast. And I thought, you're going to have carry a loaded gun, because if you have it locked in the file cabinet without bullets in it, how are you going to get it fast enough? And my last point is lockdowns. I worked at Adams 12 5-star schools for over 25 years, and I wish I could remember when we started lockdown procedures, but that school district had a wonderful way of keeping kids safe. Within, I'd say 20 seconds to 30 seconds, our classrooms were safe. We did drills about 5 to 6 times a year. The kids treated it like a fire drill. I won't go into the details and take the time, but if people are interested on how we did it, because I think that this same procedure should exist throughout the Denver metropolitan area. Maybe it does, because I retired in 2012, like I said, and I don't know what Littleton's procedures are because our daughters went to Denver public schools. But I couldn't believe how safe I felt because of the way we had procedures. I was at one school where we did have active shooter in the neighborhood area. We did have lockdown procedures, and it worked. The shooter didn't come close to the school. But anyway.
Thank you, Ann.
I looked into trying to get somewhere with David Ortega, our representative, the person he, suggested I talk to. It's not going to happen in Colorado. It's really sad that they can't have the same lockdown procedures throughout the whole state. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Good point. Linda Daniel, did you have your hand up?
I did. I had 2 questions, and perhaps the folks on this call will not be able to answer them, but the first one is, we register guns or cars, boats, motorcycles. Why not? We wear seatbelts, so those are all sort of limitations for safety upon our liberties. And the gun owners reject that point. The second question is, and I've never received an answer from people that I have inquired of, why does an individual need an automatic multi-shot gun like an AK-47? There's no purpose for that gun other than war or multiple shootings, and the build it yourself as well.
Well, they do take them to the practice ranges and say they should have the ability the right to use those at the practice ranges if they want to. That's their argument, of course.
It can't
I'm
go
with you.
fully automatic though.
Karen Alexander, you had your hand up.
I agree with Jim Vandemiller. I really think this is an issue where we have to start at a grassroots level. I think that churches that are on, I was reading something, it was up this weekend about Jerry Falwell and all his drama. And you look back into Liberty University and it's a very, I try to wrap my head around it. It's a very conservative, but also bringing politics into religion. And it seems as though that side of the religious spectrum has figured out a way to support all the gun issues. And I just think we have an opportunity as a Methodist church that we should be making a stance. So I agree with Jim Vandemiller 1,000%. And there's no better day than today to get started. I just don't know how to get that lifted off the ground, but I fully support that.
Gene Dawson, go ahead. Unmute yourself, Gene. Lower left corner of your screen, unmute.
Sorry, yes, thank you. I would just second what was said there and also Jim's comment. When Jason Crow comes to us, that would certainly be an important question. How important might it be if the religious community, that would mean rabbinic councils, National Council of Churches, etc., and so forth, could come up with a joint policy statement and come out of the woods and take a stand, because this is definitely a moral issue. And I think Ron has made that vividly clear to all of us. So I'm just affirming what has been said here.
Well, we could start a committee in the church, starting right out of our class. Let's think about that. I have a quick question for you all too. If you were the CEO of King Soopers after the shooting in Boulder, would you put an armed guard out front of every King Soopers for a month or two in case there was a copycat shooter?
Well, Steve, they're doing that in Aurora. So Aurora, King
Really?
Soopers does have an armed patrolman.
I
at
didn't
the
know
end.
that.
Yes.
Just a thought, just a question. Thank you, Gene.
What they should do is put metal detectors minute you walk through, the alarm goes off.
If you want to say something, just.
It's a hard
My opinion-
question. That's okay.
My opinion
ahead,
on that
Jim.
is that if it's a police officer, and you can hire off-duty police officers, but he's in full uniform, I think that would be fine. But I don't think to have a rent-a-cop out there, I think that would be the worst thing that they could do.
Yeah, and churches too, for our church, should we have somebody standing out front as a deterrent? There's
Sure.
pros and cons to that too.
Yeah.
Yes.
My
we should have
concern-
somebody.
My concern about churches is I've been talking to several people about the percentage of concealed carry that's going on in Highlands Ranch, and it's a fairly high percentage. And I don't have enough things to worry about, so I have to invent a few more. My concern is that there is some kind of an incident that takes place during worship at St. Andrew with 700 or 800 people in the sanctuary, and we started having gangbusters type shootout in the sanctuary when we are in the midst of worship. I don't think there's been very many incidences of what the NRA said, that the only solution to a bad man with a gun is a good man with a gun. I live in absolute fear of a good man with a gun at worship service at St. Andrew on Sunday morning.
They might not have good aim. Yeah.
Might not have very good aim.
Jim Watson, go ahead, please.
Well, the basis of the problem is the believed sacredness of the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, that they have the right to bear arms. Well, if you look back at the history of the Second Amendment, before we had our independence, there were a lot. Well, during that period of history, we were a frontier nation, and every household had a muzzle loader, or usually a muzzle loader rather than a pistol. And in the French and Indian War, we had militias that helped the British against the French. Well, then along came our move for independence, and we didn't have a standing army, of course. We were just the colonists. The British had the armed force. So we called these citizens with their arms to be militias and to fight the war. Well, we were very lucky in winning the war. And when we were a wobbly independent nation, we didn't have a standing army. Probably couldn't afford it, but we didn't have it. We still had the militias. So that's what was existing in 1791. And after we defeated the British, the Congress thought, well, they might come back. So we want the militias to keep their firearms. And indeed, they did need to come back in 1812. So we had the Second Amendment in 1791 that said people had the right to bear arms because they needed to come back. Well, the founders had no conception of automatic weapons, which can, kill people at a rapid rate. And don't want to lose my thought here.
It's okay, Jim. Thank you for the historical perspective.
I have one other point.
Okay, go ahead. We got to wrap up too.
Important point. A lot of these people think they need to have these automatic weapons to fight against our own government, and they're forgetting that our weapon against the government is the vote, not an insurrection or a civil war.
Good point, Jim.
Is the weapon against the government if we need it, because against our other enemies, we're spending more money than any other people in the world.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim, for the historical perspective. Okay, we need to wrap up. Any final thoughts from anybody that hasn't commented? Brett, go ahead, please.
I'm good. I think it's interesting if you look at the data, just by the numbers, we spend 99% of our concern over 0.2% of a situation. Why aren't we talking about suicide? If we're really concerned about gun violence, we should be talking about suicide. We should be talking about mental health. But our society likes the sensationalism. If it bleeds, it leads. So I think we like the glamour of it as opposed to actually solving problems.
Good point. Good point. Okay, Natalie, and then let's wrap up. Let's let Ron have the last say. Natalie, go ahead.
Sounds good. Let's walk backwards and think about why this is happening in the first place. We've said, we've had the stats and everything, but then, mental health issues, are we doing enough in that area? I mean, it's just a huge problem. So, walk backwards and start at the beginning. Why did these people do that? And so on. Anyway, thank you. This has been really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Ron, what do you think as we wrap up?
I just want to point out that suicide doesn't bother our psyche as badly as a mass shooting, because
right.
The suicide person made a self decision affecting primarily themselves, at least
Right.
taking of a life. Whereas your liberty and your life is taken from you through no choice of yours when you're killed by homicide or a mass shooting. So our brains react differently to it,
Some
and
kind of a
probably
pop-up that's
rightly
going
so.
on.
Yeah. Well, most parents are divorced if their kids commit suicide. It's, a very big problem.
Yeah.
That's the thing about this one. There's so many factors about the gun violence problem. Hard to get our laws around and our minds around too. Thank you, everybody, for a great discussion. Thank you, Ron, for a good presentation. Lord, we pray that we'll find a solution to this somehow eventually. Thank you, everybody. Hope to see you next week.
Okay.
Thank you, Ron.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.